Good morning, Jessica.
Good morning. I am not playing March Madness, but if you were to ask me how I pick, I'm like, which mascot do I like better? Whose colors are the better colors?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so it's a huge deal in our house. Like our boys, it's a big deal when the brackets come out. Like we've got to spread them all out, print them off, fill it out. And Megan, my wife, obviously she's just not, sports is not her thing. And she's in a home full of boys who just really, really, really love sports. I was like, Mom, did you see? She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, talk to Dad. Don't know, don't care. Thanks. But she does the bracket. And she's like, hey, wait, what? They're green. Okay, yeah, let's go with them. Wait, what's their Yeah, that's a pretty weak mascot. Okay, we're not going to pick them. But it works.
But I do pick dynasties like Kentucky. I would have been upset. Duke, Coach, like I do pick dynasty teams and probably teams that when I was paying attention to that stuff were really good, like in the early 2000s.
Yeah, absolutely. So, did you have a good spring break?
I did. We went skiing, and I have dubbed my middle child the mountain cheetah because she was so fast. She just pointed her skis straight down the mountain, and I was like the bravest I've ever been chasing her.
Kids are terrifying on ski slopes.
Yeah, totally.
They just like whatever, and they go and they're just going 100 miles an hour in between your legs. They're fearless. I love it.
Yeah, it was so fun though. So we had a really good time.
All right, so I want to talk about this idea. I'll make sure Tracy's not sending messages because somebody was. So we talked about this on the Monday Mindset a month or so ago after you and I had talked about this. And as tends to happen, like if I have a conversation with Jessica, for those listening, I walk away. One, I feel dumb. I'm like, she's just brilliant. I'm like, man, I don't really think on that level. But then two, walk away thinking like, that was really, really, really good. She needs to write a book. She needs to do this. Because you just think at a really high level, stuff that's just really powerful, really impactful, and really clear, which is uncommon. A lot of people think at high levels, but they're not able to like bring that to clarity where people can actually do something with it. So I want to visit this idea of emotional integration because I think it's really, really critical for leaders and teams today. So how would you describe emotional integration?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So I think you and I were talking about kind of some of the trends that we're seeing in consulting, right? And so over the course of the pandemic, I have watched leaders try to respond to the needs of their employees. And some leaders have always had a lot of access to empathy and compassion, and they lead that way. Other leaders, and I would consider myself this type, other leaders, right? We're so logical, so kind of like business analytical minded by nature, that when the world swung to pandemic status and all of a sudden we needed to respond with empathy and compassion, it was a learning curve. And so as we responded to that, what I saw was this kind of pendulum swinging, as we do, right? Humans, we swing the pendulum. So I saw the pendulum swing from it's not personal, it's business, kind of that mantra, all the way to we need to respond to every human need that we're seeing in the business world. And a lot of leaders found themselves unable to find the midline or unable to fully swing over into that empathy, compassion space. And so what I began thinking about is what's the actual goal? What's the true north here that we're trying to achieve or establish? And that's where I came up with this idea of like, integration is actually the goal. We shouldn't have ever been leading in this cold, stoic viewpoint. Also, we can't only lead from an emotional viewpoint. We have to find a true north, which I termed emotional integration or integrated leadership, where both of those aspects of leadership are actually integrated together into a whole. That's what integration is, making it whole, and moving forward in our leadership behavior from that integrated standpoint.
And it's to your point, the issue leaders were facing, right, is that they've been trained in this way of leadership forever. I mean, since the beginning of time, leadership, it's this stoicism, like my facts don't care about your feelings. And there is some good that comes from that, but there's also harm that comes from that. I think we had talked about that leads to leaders overpowering people. And then but they hadn't been trained in this new way of like empathy and caring and compassion and trying to meet every human need. And it's not that they didn't care. a lot of people haven't been trained to show how to actually care and to care according to who you're leading. But they were being held accountable to lead in this world when they'd only been trained in this world and being expected to flip to there overnight. But to your point, it's like to lead over here all the time. I think you phrase it like this is overwhelming. To constantly live out of your emotion or what you think you need or your feelings is overwhelming to you and to everyone around you. And so to try to navigate that space of like, wait, there's some of this is good and some of this is good, but what's true? Like, how do we get back to truth? And so how have you been, and some of that even goes to the giant language of support and challenge, right? Like leadership forever has been this heavy challenge. And now it's switching over to the support. Well, it's like, you need both, right? For true liberation, for true progress, you've got to meet somewhere in the middle. So how have you been helping leaders kind of navigate that space?
Before I answer that question, I will caveat, I do think some leaders didn't care. So,
Sure.
you said it's not that leaders didn't care. I have definitely sat in lots and lots of high-level executive spaces where it was really a true sense that the leaders don't care how the people feel, that feelings were a barrier to getting things done. And so I think in that schema of leadership, there is this sense that people are barriers. There's a sense of judgment, right? So to your point, connecting it back to support challenge, that over challenge under support, there really can be a sense of judgment if you have feelings about this change or this vision or this tactic that we're employing, then you are part of the problem. And that's what some of the swinging back has been. It was a correction to an actual issue, not just a movement from one historical period and way of leading to another way of leading. I think it was a correction of a flaw that was forced into being by this, everybody is going through this global pandemic. All of the sudden, we can't ignore people's personal lives because we can see their personal lives behind them, right? We can see their child popping into the video. We can see their cat jumping on their lap. So all of a sudden, we can no longer separate work and home in the way that we could previously. So there was kind of this ideological correction that needed to happen, as well as this, I would say, collapsing barriers between home and life that essentially pushed us into this space where we had to figure out, what do we do now? And it was that, what do we do now? To your question, what am I doing to coach? I've had leaders going, man, we feel like we've done everything in the entire world to support our people. What do we do now? We feel like we've overcorrected, which is a completely normal tendency, right? To overcorrect. And so this establishment of like, what is that true north? How do we find integration is part of the way that I've been coaching people. I also kind of drew out this diagram to make the point that we've always needed to make this correction. We've always needed to find this balance. This isn't a balance that has emerged or a need for balance that has emerged by the overcorrection. We always needed to. We just now realize we need to make the correction, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, I think, to your point, we were moving that direction slowly. Like as we've been working with leaders over the last several years, like this idea of caring, of seeing people as people, like we've been moving more that direction. But it just, with the pandemic, it just shifted fully, right? That pendulum wasn't just inching. It went all the way over to this side.
Yeah, that's right. If you think about the research that Google did on psychological safety, or Edmondson, came up with this concept of, psychological safety is the ability to put disparate views on the table, to challenge, to say that I need help, and to not experience repercussion for that. And so that presence of psychological safety was found to be a key indicator for high-performing teams. Well, how do you establish psychological safety? Well, you have to be leading with empathy. You have to be listening. You have to be, compassionate and curious. And all of these are actually emotional characteristics of leadership. And that research was established well before the period of time that we are in right now. And so this is why I say we've always needed to find a new way of leading. We've always needed to lean into more human ways of relating to one another, but we struggled and then we overcorrected. right? Then we
Mm-hmm.
overcorrected
Yep.
in the pandemic.
Yep. No, that's good. And the shift needed to happen, right? It's like, and we were slowly seeing that because we're slowly realizing people aren't numbers on an org chart. They're not numbers on your balance sheet. Like they're people, they're humans. And it was easy to treat them as numbers or as employees as a great point when we didn't see their home life, right? When we only see them as producers, right, as people who come in and do a job and then go home, it's easy. It's not right, but it's easy to make that distinction or separation. But then when you're on a Zoom call and their kid is jumping in their lap, or their kid is right there behind them, you can see them doing homework, and the dog runs through, and then another kid runs through. It's like, oh, they're human, and you have to acknowledge that. And leaders for a long time, I think they've considered that to be weak. They've considered it to be unnecessary. They've certainly considered it to be uncomfortable. But you're dealing with people. It doesn't mean, and we've, I think we've made caring about people seem like, okay, we've got to go to like a group retreat and hold hands, sing kumbaya around the campfire. Like leaders will make it seem as weird as possible so they can avoid it. Well, I'm not about that. It's like, no, nobody said do that. Like, don't make it as weird as possible just so you can avoid it. It's just simply building relationships and communicating and listening. But leaders have to be trained. To your point, so many of them don't think like that, and some do care, some don't care. But for all of them, it's a skill, right? Because if their natural tendency is to think logic, to think business, to think results, they have to be trained to understand people and to connect with people and how to lead in that way. And it's a process, right? It's where our culture, I think, gets this really wrong. It's like we expect them to flip overnight. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, they've led this way for 20, 30 years, however long they've been in leadership. They don't come up. If they're making progress, let's celebrate that. Let's not beat them up because they're not here tomorrow when they've just been told to be there,
So let me, to your, just a second. It's saying that it can't see my screen. Let me try one more time. I was going to show you the diagram because you mentioned the idea of skill set, right? Like it's a skill mm-hmm. set. And I do think that it is related to skills. But I think one of the barriers, it's not going to let me share, but I think one of the barriers to learning the skills is admitting that you need to learn, which is vulnerable, right? Vulnerability in leadership is hard, especially when the pressure has been know everything, be effortlessly perfect, right? The myth of effortless perfection that somehow mm-hmm. I just magically was already good at. And I think that it can be harder to admit when your learning curve is empathy. It can be harder to admit. It's easy for me to say, hey, listen, I don't understand that technology. I don't understand how to use this new kind of like Zoom or Google Meet or whatever the technology mediated, because that's something that, oh yeah, it's new. Everybody needs to learn that. But if your mm-hmm. skill set that you need to learn is, I need to learn to slow down and be present with people. I need to learn how to ask better questions and how to not be so task dominated. Like that feels like a vulnerability that shouldn't exist, right? It feels like a skill set. I need to learn to listen, right? Like, isn't that something that
what leader wants to admit that?
Right. What leader wants to say that out loud? But truly, that is the learning curve that many leaders have found themselves like scrambling to figure out. And I think the thing that throw it on top of all of this is we are in a very polarized kind of echo chamber dynamic in our culture where we like to yell at each other, right? Cancel culture. So mm-hmm. all of a sudden, if you have this skill that it seems like you should already have, like the skills gap that it seems like you should already have, then admitting that feels really difficult. Because if I say, hey, I'm trying really hard to learn how to be more authentic as a leader, I'm trying really hard to be more empathetic, but I have to try, then mm-hmm. that it seems like it's going to raise the flags of cancel culture and just kind of shouting at one another, which immediately throws up walls of self-preservation. So I think that that's part of the dynamic of how do we find that true north is admitting and being vulnerable enough to say, here's what I'm working on. And for the other person to go like, okay, thank you, right? Thanks for working on that. We all know that you need to.
And that's a huge piece, right? Because like everybody has a role to play. Everybody has a part to play in this process. And so one, I think people don't realize the burden of leadership. Like it is a heavy, heavy, heavy burden where every decision you make is impacting dozens of people and their families. Depending on the size of your organization, could be hundreds, could be thousands of people and their families. And that's a burden, right? We personalize every decision a leader makes when it's like they're not making necessarily personal decisions. They're making team or organizational decisions. And they feel the pressure in this environment to be perfect. And if they admit they have a flaw, especially one like, I need to learn to slow down. I need to be a better listener. I need to be a better communicator. I need to show that I care. Like they feel like I'm going to get fired. If I say that, I'm going to get, because I'm the leader. I'm supposed to be able to do these things. And people are so quick to judge a leader. Like it's a really interesting, probably a conversation for another day. But like the culture right now assumes the worst in leaders. Mm-hmm. And so that wall of self-preservation gets higher and higher. Like I'm going to hide the fact that I'm not a good listener. I'm going to hide the fact that I don't know how to show that I care, which just makes these things worse. And so for people on the other side, for a leader to be vulnerable, which is really difficult, for them to say, man, guys, like I need to learn to ask better questions. And I'm trying. I get it. I realize like that's not created good environment, good culture. So like I'm committed to working on it. For the other side to be like, awesome. Instead of shame, oh, you idiot, how'd you not know how to listen? Like, well, and then as soon as they mess up, I knew you were never going to get better. I knew you were just saying that just to say it. It's like, no, it's like, I wouldn't do that to my kid riding their bike, right? They trip and fall. You idiot. You're never going to learn to ride a bike. I knew it. Just walk everywhere. Mm-hmm. No, I'd be like, hey, that's all right, bud. You're trying. I appreciate the effort. Get up and let's keep, and you encourage them, you cheer them on if they're trying to make progress, like if they're actually showing that they want to get better. And people just, there's that burden of leadership and it's difficult, but both parties play a role. So what, if I'm a leader today listening to this and I'm realizing, man, maybe I'm not caring, right? Maybe I'm still in that old school mindset. Or two, and I found myself in this new world. I'm like, I don't know what to do. Or two, maybe I've swung all the way too far. And it's like, oh man, I've been empowering feelings that aren't real, emotions that aren't helpful, not just for myself, but in my team. What can leaders do to get themselves in this space and to help get their teams in this space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Again, before I answer that, I'm thinking too, Kevin, about the real risk that's involved in vulnerability. So I don't want to throw it out there like it's some nothingness. The root idea of vulnerability is to be able to allow yourself to risk being hurt, right? Like that's literally the root idea of vulnerability is I'm going to do something. I'm going to say something. I'm going to risk something. I'm going to try something. And on the other side of it, I might get hurt. That's if on the other side of risk taking isn't the possibility of getting hurt, I'm not actually being vulnerable.
Yep. That's good.
Right. Like it's a safe bet. It's a safe bet. So until I've moved out into the space as a leader where I'm actually taking a risk that maybe risks my reputation, maybe it the idea that I have it all together, whatever, maybe it drops my kind of sense of striving or proving, then I'm not really being vulnerable. So I think for leaders, the first thing I would say is you have to take a risk. Like leaders have to go first. And it's interesting, Brene Brown, who I consider to be like a leading person in this side of like leading with vulnerability, compassion. She talks about how we have to, that vulnerability precedes trust. It's not the other way around. A lot of times we're like, well, as soon as I can build up enough trust, goodwill in this team, then I'm going to take a risk. No. It's actually the complete opposite. So if we want to be an integrated leader, we want to lead teams who trust one another, who take risks together, we have to go first. And I think we have to recognize our own fears inside of that vulnerability, inside of like risking that much. And so we have to be aware and acknowledge our own feelings and the feelings of our team. We have to listen and understand what our feelings are trying to communicate. And then we discern what's right and true. I think the first thing that we often want to do as leaders, again, with that kind of training towards business analytics and kind of overvaluing logic and reason, is that we want to immediately jump to what's true before we listen. And I think listening and taking risks in that listening space is what needs to happen before we get to solving, before we get to facts, before we start to, say what's right or wrong. We actually need to listen and then validate in order to discern what's right and true for a path. So I think leaders of teams, we have to learn how to begin to pull the feelings of the situation together with the facts of the situation before we go to the outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish here? So we have to grow. We have to understand that both feelings and facts, both logic and empathy, have a place at the table. And until we understand the relationship of those two things, we're probably not ready to go to solving. So I think if I was coaching one thing, obviously we're having like a 30-minute conversation here, I would say learning to listen and allow space for feelings, but not let those things drive the car, is the biggest learning curve that leaders need to, employ in their teams.
Yeah. And I think for leaders listening, I know that none of that sounds fun or like to listen to the feelings of your team. I get it. What you will find is they will feel more valued, more heard, more respected, which means they're going to want to work harder. They're going to want to produce better results. They're going to want to be more vulnerable and understanding themselves, right? When they feel like you are understanding of them, they will want to be more understanding of you. So that mindset will multiply, but leaders have to go first. And I get it too, is like, again, as a leader, that wall, the higher you go up in an organization, I think that the higher that wall of self-preservation of trying to protect what you have and not take risks, not be willing to be hurt or be seen as imperfect. But if you will take that step, if you will lower the wall and take the step, your team will respond because they're saying, okay, it is safe. It's like they're admitting they need help in this, or they don't understand, or they feel whatever. Okay, I can do that too. And when you get a whole team, it's not, leaders don't hear what we're not saying. This isn't like your whole team's just going to come out and be crying in a meeting and I'm afraid and I'm worried and I'm like, maybe, but it's mostly just them like being willing to say like, hey, I don't understand this thing and I need help, or I'm struggling with this thing and I need help, or I'm nervous about this thing and I need help. Can you explain it to me? And because there are all these things going on in your team's heads that you don't know about. And it's impacting how they hear your communication, how they receive your communication, how they communicate. And to be able to get those things out on the table, I love what you said, to not just get them out like, all right, good, now let's go to truth, but to get them out and say, okay, like let's listen to those things, let's process those things, and then let's start to move toward where we actually need to be going. Your team will just feel so much more valued and heard, and the drama in your organization will get a whole lot better. The constantly feel like you're having to pull people along will get a whole lot easier, because it's not gonna be perfect, but it will get a whole lot easier when you create space to be and work to be an integrated leader, building an integrated team. All right, Tracy, do we have any questions? People's minds are probably blown right now. So what questions do we have coming in?
Yeah, great conversation. Okay, so Anthony is saying, what do you say to leaders who are eager to get the pendulum fully swung back in that uncorrected direction? Is there still hope for them? And by uncorrected, he said uncorrected being pre-pandemic, non-people focused.
Great question, Anthony. So I think it depends on what their voice is, right? If I'm coaching leaders and I know I'm working with a pioneer, I'm going to talk to them about the strategic importance of engagement. So engagement is actually an emotional reality. When your team members are engaged, it means that their emotions are clicked into the work. When your team members are disengaged or you're getting compliant work, that is where you're getting just enough for people to meet the minimum standard. And so I think when we're talking about getting employee engagement, making sure that we survive the Great Resignation. So if I don't know any industry that's not struggling with talent acquisition, retention, development. If we're going to survive and actually be unscathed in this talent reality, we've got to be thinking engagement, not compliance, which means that we've got to employ that empathy and compassion, where we're meeting employees in their experience of the work, not just in their outputs of the work.
Great. Any comment, Kevin?
No, I 1,000% agree. I mean, it's a great question, because you're gonna have leaders who do want to like, oh, can we just go back to the way things were? Well, let's not pretend the way things were was right or good.
Yeah.
To Jessica's point earlier, like the correction needed to happen. There needed to be a course correction, but it doesn't need to go all the way over here, right? It's finding that middle ground.
Yeah. Here's a more of a comment than a question, but Luke says, I'm a very all business leader, but I am learning. I've hired a manager who has a lot of compassion and he has helped me to see my blind spots. I am seeing a difference in my employees' responses now. Great point.
Yeah.
Gather people around you who have those skills that you're needing to acquire and learn.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humility here in Luke, I think.
Yeah. And I would say, one, that's really good. Two, just a slight warning. Don't fully delegate that to that person, right? It's like, that's their strength, so let them run with it. I see leaders too often, it's hire someone to complement your weaknesses, and then use that still as a massive weakness for you. You never learn to grow in that area. It's like, you don't need to be perfect or great in that area, but learn from that person. Delegate some to them, but you still need to be making sure that you're engaged in some of those spaces, not to the level they are, right? They're going to be better at it. But it's not okay, you do it and now it's taken care of. Like, people still want to hear and connect with you as the leader.
And I would say, Kevin, the way that I have thought about that particular thing is like major moments and minor moments. I'm probably never going to be awesome at minor moments of always remembering people's personal details and things of that. I sound like a robot, I know, when I start talking like this, but I don't have to miss major moments. Working a birth, kid's day, you know what I mean? Like executive assistant's day, employee appreciation. So I taught myself to never miss a major.
Yep.
So that I had some money in that bank account relationally. And then I was coaching myself on minor things, and definitely did surround myself with nurturers and connectors who were just better and would keep me in check. Hey, remember, we have that thing. Hey, remember, you're going to write 3 thank you notes today. Sounds very like task oriented. But if I could focus on the majors and I had somebody help me with the minors, that allowed me to just not get stuck in old habits of task and strategy orientation.
Love it.
Okay, one last question coming in from Shonda. What's the best way to let my boss know that I'm dealing with a personal issue that is affecting my work life? I'm not using it as an excuse, but it is taking a toll on my mental health.
Yeah. Great question, Shonda. So here's kind of the tricky spot. I do not and would not say that it is safe to always take major risks with your supervisor. It isn't. And that would be living outside of reality. But I think it's completely fine to say, hey, my capacity has been impacted in my personal life. I would love your help in prioritizing some deadlines and some deliverables so that I can make sure not to miss the major stuff as I'm working on bringing a few things back into alignment. So I think I would let them know I'm working on it. This is handled, but I would like your help in prioritization because I've got some things going on in my personal life that I'm not comfortable sharing. I might be comfortable sharing depending on my relationship with my supervisor. I can't share exactly what all those things are, but I want to let you know that I am working hard at prioritizing the most important things. So, either letting them know or asking for their help. Actually asking for the help of your supervisor tends to turn them towards you as an ally unless they really are kind of colder, in which case I would take less risk.
Love that. Yeah, that's all the questions coming in. Any last comments, either of you, Kevin or Jessica? This has been great.
I love it. Any chance to learn from Jessica is just, it's gold. So we could sit here for hours, but neither of us have time because Jessica's the busiest person I know, and I have actual work to do today. Oddly enough, doesn't happen very often, but I have things to do. No, I appreciate it, Jessica. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for your wisdom and the way that you think about things and help to make everyone around you better. Any final thoughts? Last words?
I don't think so. Just thanks for having me on. It was great to have everybody in the chat, and thanks, Tracy, for hosting.
All right. Well, we'll see all of you next Monday, same time, same place, although we won't have Jessica back here next Monday. She's got too much to do. So thank you, Jessica. Thanks, Kevin. See you all next time.